Something about this that's so black. It's like, how much more black could this be?
Sup internet, Raggedy Adams here. This week I went to see my first IMAX film. So yeah. The thing that everybody takes away from the IMAX experience is that it's very immersive. And while I don't have a particular bone to pick with that argument, I think, on the whole, it was a very immersive experience compared to a lot of the 3D films that I've seen over the years. It kind of comes down to a film by film basis, and you have to consider really the kind of films that you're watching. Because up until a few years ago, when The Dark Knight came out, there wasn't really a big push for mainstream films in IMAX cinemas. It's only really been following on from the success of The Dark Knight and various films that have come out after it, that people have really seen it as a platform for narrative filmmaking in a large 3D format, which is fine. But before that, and still sort of today, the majority of IMAX films tend to be either things like documentaries, which are produced on like super low budgets, or they're concert movies, which are trying to give you the feeling of being in the gig. Which brings me neatly to Metallica Through the Never, which I saw this week at the Cineworld in Nottingham, which has its own dedicated IMAX screen. Now, I'm kind of like an on-again, off-again fan of Metallica. I tend to prefer the older stuff from like the early to mid-90s. Stuff like the Black Album and Garage Inc. and some of the stuff from the 80s. And whilst I wouldn't go so far as to say I was a massive mega fan of them, I still appreciate their music. Plus I have had the privilege of seeing them play at festivals twice, back to back. The first time at Sonisphere 2011, when they were playing with the Big Four, and the second time last year at Download, where they played the Black Album in its entirety. So I guess it's fair to say that even if I wasn't the biggest Metallica fan in the world, and it's fair to say I'm kind of not, I've still had the opportunity to see them plenty of times, and I've got a pretty good idea of what the Metallica live experience is like. So the question that really matters, from my point of view, is how does Through the Never measure up to the live experience? Is it better, is it worse, or is it just as good? Well, my advice to you is, if you haven't seen Metallica play live, you should get on that right away. Even if you're not a big Metallica fan, or they're just like on the bill of like a festival that you're considering going to anyway, it's well worth the investment. They put on a really good show, they're all really professional, and they love their fans. And one of the big things I took away from watching the film is that it's very much geared to the people who are the dedicated fans, who will get all the references, who will know, for instance, what their opening theme song is, which I also happen to do, and it's one of my favourite pieces of music. And the addition of the 3D and the special effects all serves to kind of heighten the experience for the people who know what to expect, but to also give those unfamiliar with it a pretty accurate idea of the concert-going experience. However, if I did have to pick a point to criticise the film for, and I kind of have to do that, it would be the fact that the narrative aspect of it feels a little bit weak. The guy who directs the film is a Hungarian-American director called Nimrod Antal, who has quite possibly the most metal name in the history of film directing. But he's also the guy who directed Predators with Adrian Brody and Lawrence Fishburne and like everyone really, as well as films like Vacancy and Armored. The film is very visually striking and has a lot of very cool and very kind of well choreographed movements and stunts. And obviously the stage show itself has a level of choreography that is very well put together. But the framing narrative that fits around it doesn't really hang together very well. It's not bad as such, it's just very basic. Essentially, the story of the film is Dane DeHaan, who you may remember from Chronicle, is a roadie called Trip, who is sent off to recover an item that is in a truck that has broken down en route to the gig and needs to be recovered for the band. I won't spoil what the item is, but it's essentially a MacGuffin. You never find out specifically what it is or what role it would have played in the events of the show. It is essentially just that, a plot device to move the story forward. But while the character's en route, his van gets hit by another car, he crashes, he pulls himself out of the wreckage, and he finds himself in the middle of a confrontation between some protesters and some riot police. And then later there is this confrontation with this imposing death-like figure on horseback. He wears a full face gas mask sort of thing and has this really mean-looking club axe thing. He's essentially the main character's nemesis. And that's essentially it. It's a pretty basic story. But to be honest, if you're going into it expecting anything more than like an extended music video, you're pretty much going to the wrong place. The other problem that I had was purely one of getting the hang of the IMAX experience. For starters, it's loud. Very fucking loud. And when you go to see a Metallica film in IMAX, expect it to be even more so. So just prepare yourself for the level of just sheer loudness. Secondly, I've seen maybe a dozen 3D films in the past 2, maybe 3 years. I'm not a big fan of them, but some of them are better than others. I still to this day haven't seen Avatar, and I really have no desire to do so, but I've seen others that have used the format well. However, watching those 3D films in regular cinemas did not prepare me for the sheer size, the sheer mind-boggling hugeness of the IMAX screen and the effect that it kind of has on your eyes and on your brain. Now, I know that a lot of people have trouble watching 3D films because of the polarization effect. It's roughly half of people can just watch it and be fine with it, whereas other people, it just messes with their equilibrium. It gives them migraine. They have all sorts of trouble with it. This is one of the few occasions when, with the combination of the huge screen and the massive, massive noise of it, and admittedly a couple of cocktails beforehand, I did feel the beginnings of a migraine as I was leaving the theatre. But this is not to say that it is a bad or a boring or a not fun film. It's good. It's okay. I would still recommend that you go see them live instead, but if you're in a position where you cannot afford the price of a concert ticket or a festival ticket or whatever, it's probably the closest you're going to get to the level of immersion of being at the concert experience. Is it my favourite concert film or my favourite music film? Not really. It's probably in the top 10 though. I mean, it's not It Might Get Loud or The Kids Are Alright, but it's not Spice World either.